What's going on, YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. Welcome to Oh So Simplified Learn, where I give you that simplified education that you need and that you deserve. And on this channel, what I do is I take information from books and I dwindle them down into actionable, simple concepts so that you can implement them very easily into your life. And these first 10 videos is basically going to be a course of the 10 most impactful books of my life. And I'm going to give you 3 tips from book number 2, same author, The Laws of Human Nature. Wonderful book, big book, long book to read physically. Audio book I've listened to a billion times. I think I've read this once or twice, probably maybe 3 times if I just count when I skip chapters and just read certain things. But let me just jump into this one. So this book is basically all about human nature. And if you have read Robert Greene and watched as he's had his culmination, this is kind of like the book that has culminated all of his previous books. Like, he's always touched on this. He loves human nature and he loves to kind of get into it, and 33 Strategies of War, Art of Seduction, 48 Laws of Power, Mastery, 50th Law, and he kind of put all of that into this one. And I really appreciate this book and I love this book, and it was very helpful for me. So the main thing about this book is that you need to understand human nature from the individual level, from the group level, for a multitude of reasons. So number one, you have to understand it from the individual level because you have to understand yourself. Like, you're a human too. A lot of people kind of like to separate themselves from other people and judge other people in the way they do it, but you need to, one, see these things happening in other people, but you have to see these same things happening in yourself. A lot of people can't admit things like feeling envy, feeling jealousy. Like, if you bring that up, and I do it a lot in passing, and it's one of those things that I think I have to kind of tone down. It's like the first rule of Fight Club is you can't talk about Fight Club. That when I tell people like, oh, I see you being jealous, like, they usually take that very negatively because people don't like to admit that to themselves. But I digress. That's kind of like the main concept of the book, is like understanding it happening to you, understanding it happening to other people, and understanding it happening at the group level as well, because he talks about the difference between individual psychology and individual human nature and group human nature, because there's very different like kind of manifestations of human nature depending on what the circumstances. So I got 3 different pieces for you. They're basically just aligned with 3 important chapters I think to take away if you just wanted to kind of quickly learn in a video. So let me jump into this. So number 1 is, I think it's chapter 3, it's See Through People's Masks, the role of role playing. And he goes through a psychologist named Milton Erickson as his main example of this. But the whole idea of this is that there's kind of 2 languages that go on. There's the one language that people tell you, and then there's the language that's happening behind the scenes. And most of what people actually mean and are trying to convey is like behind the scenes. So, you know, not taking people's words at face value, looking at their subtle movements, looking at their subtle behavioral tics, and especially nonverbal cues, because nonverbal cues emit a lot more and are a lot harder for people to mask. So things like seeing envy, a good test, I forgot who suggested it, but it's in the book. But like, if you want to see if somebody's envious of you, if a friend is really your friend, tell them some good news about you and see how they react. Is it happiness, or do they kind of hesitate and they kind of like seem upset, and then they want to cover it up with happiness? So it's like kind of like enjoy. So it's actually like they're not happy for you. Or there's many other ways of doing it. That's just kind of one that comes to my head right away. But even ideas of like, if you ask somebody to do a favor for you and they don't outright say no, but you can kind of see in their body language that that's not a congruent yes. Like, the words that are coming out and the body language that they're emitting are 2 different things. So you have to be able to be cognizant as to, you know, what people are really conveying, what people are really up to, if you really don't want to be caught off guard when you're doing things. And then it even happens vice versa, and I think that's how I'll explain this whole book, is like, or these little topics that I'm gonna give, is that it happens on the flip side too, that basically, like, you have to understand that sometimes you say things that you don't mean. So you think you're coming across one way, because that's what you're outwardly projecting, but in another way that you didn't really convey that very well. But then on the other end, maybe you are trying to be a little bit subtle, a little bit slick, and you're trying to hide things, but you're not very good at monitoring your nonverbals and keeping your nonverbals in check. That you're saying all the right things, but people can kind of see that that's not what you really mean. Like, you're kind of giving off these other vibes that people can pick up. So it's kind of knowing it from both sides, that you know, you have to see through people's masks, and then you have to also be able to understand the mask that you're putting out, because ultimately people want to give you the best face. You know, whether in person or on social media, people are trying to promote an image that is better than the image of what they really know is inside. So that's the first one, is seeing through people's masks in the law of role. Number 2 is change your circumstances by changing your attitude, the law of self-sabotage. And the story he uses here is about Anton Chekhov, who is a writer, and he lived in Turgonia or something like that. It's pronounced something like that, but he lived in some place in Russia, and basically it was like really bad. He lived in really bad circumstances, and for a lot of his life he lived with what I'll kind of say like a very poor mindset, a very negative mindset. And the whole purpose of the chapter is you understanding that however you think things are is kind of the way you're gonna see it. So if you have a very negative outlook on life and a negative view on things, you're kind of going to see things negatively. So even something, I guess it's kind of like things are not good or bad, they just are, and it's you that makes it so. So it's like, if you are looking at things in a very negative way, in a very pessimistic way all the time, that, you know, nothing works out for you, that is what you're going to see. That's what you're going to manifest. And it's actually self-sabotaging to you, because you're actually making things that aren't good or bad, bad. And you're basically making your life worse, because you're you know, you're kind of coloring your glasses, and that's kind of what you're seeing. And it works vice versa in the positive way, that if you look at things more positively, you think that you can actually achieve certain things, you will be more motivated to do something. You know, if you don't think you can do it, you're not going to try, and then you're not going to do it. And then but if you think you can do it, you may try, and you may actually do it. You may actually push yourself to do it, because it's going to be congruent. And that's really that whole chapter. I mean, he goes very deep into a story, and it's a very interesting story about Anton Chekhov, but that's the main gist, is that your attitude has way more of effect on what you get out in life and the results that you're going to get in life than a lot of people give it credit to. And that can be either positive or negative. And don't let your attitude basically self-sabotage your success. Don't count yourself out. Like, if you're gonna get counted out, let it be something that happened in the external world that you couldn't help. Let it be, you know, a sniper shooting you in the head or something. But don't let it be your own self-doubt, your own self-criticism, your own negative outlook on your own potential and life and things that you can get. And that's the main purpose of that. And I think it's a very important chapter just to kind of grasp that, you know, you can change your circumstances by changing your attitude. You can have just a little corner of a space and clean it and make it nice and really respect your little space. And you could even be in a mansion and treat it like shit and become a hoarder, and treat it like crap and become a hoarder, and have all these things everywhere and be miserable and be like a drunkard in a mansion. So it's like really your attitude shape. And the last one, number 3, is seize the historical moment, the law of generational myopia. And the reason why I picked this one is because I actually think it's very telling of the time that we're currently in, with what's happening globally in terms of the pandemic and the internet and economically. And let me break down a couple of these words. So number 1, myopia. So that just means to have kind of a small view. And the generational myopia, and what he means. So the story that he uses to exemplify this is the French Revolution. I actually think that Robert Greene has some weird affinity for the French Revolution. It is an interesting topic, but he talks about it a ton. I think he talks about it in Mastery as well. He definitely talks about it a lot in the 48 Laws of Power. But and it was a very tumultuous time where basically it was where the monarchy was kind of being destroyed in France. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening around the world today. You know, I live in America, so, you know, with our political structure, there's a lot of questions. I mean, with all these mail-in votes too and things happening, this was a very different kind of election, with the way Donald Trump and Obama were both kind of promoted through social media to be elected, was something very different. And when you look on the internet, you hear all of these words like millennial, Generation Z, and generation, I don't know, iPad, I don't know. But it's the generation that's younger than me. There's the millennial generation and like Gen Xers, and then there's the okay boomers, there's the Karens, and there's this, especially with social media, you see there's this weird, and he calls this the zeitgeist. There's this weird interaction between, you know, I think it's really, if you want to separate them into like just big groups, it's like the boomers, the millennials, and then the kids that grew up where technology was always there. Because I think I was like the last generation of kids that, like, I remember waking up and just going outside and knocking on my friend's door to play outside. I feel like nowadays it's like that doesn't really happen. Everybody has phones, everybody has all this. I still remember memorizing all of my friends' home numbers so I could call them. Where if you have a cell phone now, that's not like really a thing. So there's a generation below me that has had technology all the time. I feel like my generation, we grew up as these technologies were being created. Like 2008 was when Facebook got really big, and that I got a Facebook while I was in high school. You know, MySpace was getting big when I was in middle school. AOL was big when I was in middle school. But prior to that, there really wasn't this social media. It was like, unless you're talking about Napster and downloading music. And then there's the generation that they didn't have any of this. Like, I've never been on a date where you couldn't text the person. Like, I've never had a date where I couldn't text the person to ask if they're there. Where I've talked to older people and they talk about, it's like, remember when you could just go somewhere and you just expected them to show up? Like, that's where, like, you hear when people talk about dating nowadays, they talk about how people flake now. But back in the day, like, if you had a date, like, nobody forgets, because that would be a very mean, because like there's no way to come into contact with the person to let them know you're not showing up or whatever like that. So all that to say, because I think I got a little bit on a tangent, is that I think there is a very big historical moment here in many different facets. Obviously, if you guys know anything about me and you guys look at any of my other channels, link in the description below. I'm very economically focused, and I see that business-wise, there's a lot of business models that are from the old paradigm that cannot stand anymore. It's something that has been shifting for a while, but I think with this pandemic, it has put a big axe in it. That a lot of these things that were shifting out, that now, you know, they might have just completely phased out. But if you think about it like a forest, right? If I cut down a couple of trees or a couple of trees fall, it's not like the forest never grows again. You know, that tree was, you know, preventing the sunlight for the plants that were below to grow. There's going to be new plants to grow, and you can be those new plants to grow. If you have things you can do, if you can lend your intelligence, your effort, your ability to solving some of these business model problems, solving some of these major global crises, if you can help, you know, people in a new way and be part of that new growth, I think you can be very successful. And you cannot be myopic. That's why he says it's the law of generational myopia, is that you can't be myopic in your view and not see the vastness of this time. That during the French Revolution, you know, that's the only life they knew. So you don't think like, oh, I'm living in a special time. I truly believe that the 2000s, especially like 2008 to 10 to maybe 2030, it's gonna be when, you know, 2070, 2080, they're gonna look back and be talking about that time like it was the 60s, like it was, you know, this was like a revolutionary time. At least 60s in America, I know that was like kind of a revolutionary time. You know, it's gonna be thought of as that. Like, it's gonna be this time where, you know, these big behemoths came in terms of business wise, these new models of, you know, doing politics and governing nations, this new way of distributing things, whether it be wealth and, you know, it's all on an individual, you got to make it your way, or the government takes a bigger stake and is handing out money. I don't know, but I think we're in a crazy generation, and you have to see the zeitgeist for what it is, see the different generations, learn how to navigate. And that's something he talks more about in the 48 Laws of Power, but in this one too, because the main character, Jacques Danton, I don't want to be a spoiler, but if you know any history, I mean, it's out there. Homeboy got killed, so he got guillotined from his own movement. So you got to also see that, you know, certain movements might not be around. It might be a radical movement right now, but it might not be the actual solution, and it might turn into something where you are, you know, you are the prisoner of your own creation, and you're the victim of the own monster you created. And that was kind of what happened to Danton and Robespierre. You're only going to really understand who those people are a little bit better if you read the story, but that's the basic gist, is like understanding the generation you're in, not having a myopic view, having more of a global view of time, of history, of the different generations that are at play, the interplay, you know, of the different generations and the different values, and also understanding the general path of a civilization, that it's like a general civilization. It first is brought up on super hard work, and then the next generation is a little bit, you know, not tied to the hard work of the past, but they still have some of those morals. And then the next generation is completely not tied to the morals, doesn't remember the work, and is very confused. And then the fourth generation, they're not tied to the hard work that emerged the times, they're not tied to the values, they're very confused, and then they're in kind of a destruction mode. And I feel like we're in that fourth mode. We're in that mode where everything is being questioned, everything is kind of coming down. The times have changed, but people are disconnected to what really brought us here and how, you know, hard it was to go here. If you think about the ethics of like 70 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. So that's really where I think we are, and that's why I picked out that last chapter. So those were just 3 different like chapters in the book. I mean, the book is very long. It's over 500 pages. It might be 600 pages. So if you want to read it, it's a great book to read, I think. I mean, I like to read challenging books. Just as I mentioned with Mastery, he's not like the easiest writer to read. It's not like a general self-help book where you're gonna just read like, you know, you could just read pages, just page. Like, you're probably gonna have to kind of sit there. It might take you a little bit longer, but I do think there's a benefit to doing that. If you want to get the audiobook is great. Some of the great stories he gives, if you just want to know. I mean, he talks about, I like the guy Shackleton, he talks about, but Queen Elizabeth has a great story. Katerina Sforza has a great story of like being kind of like a queen. I didn't say it, it was like kind of had to debate whether I was going to put it, the law of conformity, and he talks about the Cultural Revolution in China, beware of the downward pull of the group. And I want to throw that out here because I didn't really talk as much, except in the last point, about group dynamics, but he has a great quote from Nietzsche. I'm kind of doing this off the top, so I might have to paraphrase it a little bit, but he says, it's like, how does it go? Insanity is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, classes, and ages, or something like that. Groups, party, classes, and ages, it's the rule. And that's kind of like, I think, one of the biggest things that's important in his work that he writes, is that there is a difference between individual nature, human nature, and group human nature, but it's all human nature, and you need to understand it inside and out to see how you interact with the group, how the group is interacting towards you, how you interact as an individual, how the individuals that you're interacting with act too. He gives great stories on Rockefeller as well. But I'm gonna stop just ranting on this. It's a great book. Book number 2. Come to you with book number 3 next week. But you like the content, like, comment, subscribe. You mess with the vibe, welcome to the tribe. And until next time, peace out. And if you want to actually check out my other channel, just click in the link in the description below. Peace.